The chamber is open and full of whispers.
What if Hermione Granger was the secret daughter of Sirius Black? Let's explore the depths of it in this video. 1978. A war that took everything. Sirius Black graduated from Hogwarts in June 1978 at 18 years old. Tall, handsome, with aristocratic good looks and a reckless streak that made him dangerous in the best possible way, he walked out of the castle he'd called home and straight into a war. The First Wizarding War was at its peak. Voldemort's forces were killing Order members at a rate of roughly one per week. The Pruitt brothers, Fabian and Gideon, would die in 1981, taking 5 Death Eaters with them. Dorcas Meadows would be murdered by Voldemort personally. The Bones family would be nearly wiped out. And Marlene McKinnon, along with her entire family, would be slaughtered by Death Eaters in mid-1981. But in autumn 1978, Marlene was alive. She was 22 years old, a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and fighting alongside James and Lily Potter, Remus Lupin and Sirius Black, in a shadow war where survival was measured in weeks rather than years. Sirius had no canonical romantic relationships. None. Not a single mention in 7 books of a girlfriend, a lover, a relationship of any kind. For a charismatic young man in the most intense period of his life, surrounded by a tight-knit band of fighters who trusted each other with their lives, this absence is suspicious. The truth was simpler and more devastating than anyone knew. Sirius Black and Marlene McKinnon had a brief relationship during the desperate months of late 1978 and early 1979. It wasn't a grand romance. It was 2 people who might not survive the year finding comfort in each other when the war allowed. They were careful. They were secret. And when Marlene discovered she was pregnant in early 1979, they made a choice that would echo through history. The war was escalating. Voldemort was targeting prominent pure-blood traitors specifically. Sirius was already a marked man, a Black who had rejected his family, best friend of James Potter, Inner Circle Order member. Marlene's family was being hunted. The McKinnons were known Order sympathizers, and Death Eaters were closing in. Albus Dumbledore, when consulted, offered a solution that was both brilliant and terrible. The child must be hidden, Dumbledore said, his blue eyes grave behind his half-moon spectacles. Not just physically hidden, but made invisible. If Voldemort learns that Sirius Black has a daughter, he will use her as a weapon. Against you, against the Order, against everything we're trying to protect. Where? Marlene asked. She was 3 months pregnant, showing just enough that the concealment charms were becoming difficult to maintain. I know a couple, Dumbledore said. Muggles. Good people. They've been trying for years to have a child and cannot. They would love her as their own, and I can ensure they believe she is their own. Memory charms, Sirius said flatly. You want to alter their memories to make them think they conceived and bore a child that isn't theirs. I want to save your daughter's life, Dumbledore corrected. And yours, and Marlene's, and everyone else Voldemort would torture to find her if he knew she existed. It was Marlene who agreed first. Do it. Whatever it takes to keep her safe. September 19th, 1979. A birth and a lie. The girl was born on September 19th, 1979, in a private room at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. She had brown eyes and a shock of dark hair that would, in time, become the bushiest mess of curls anyone had ever seen. She was healthy, loud, and extraordinary in the way all newborns are extraordinary to the people who made them. Sirius held her for exactly 10 minutes. He counted. He memorized her face, the weight of her in his arms, the way her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. She's perfect, he said. She's ours, Marlene said. No matter what happens, no matter where she goes, she's ours. David and Helen Granger were both dentists, both in their early 30s, both desperate for a child after years of failed attempts. They were intelligent, kind, and completely ordinary. They were also, within the hour, completely convinced that Helen had given birth to a daughter 6 months earlier, and that they had named her Hermione Jean Granger. The memory charms Dumbledore used were flawless. He implanted memories of a pregnancy, a birth, 6 months of sleepless nights, and first smiles and the overwhelming love that comes with parenthood. He gave them photograph albums with pictures that had never been taken, medical records that documented a pregnancy that had never happened, and the absolute certainty that this child was theirs, the same magic that would, 17 years later, allow Hermione Granger to erase herself completely from her parents' memories to protect them from Voldemort, was used by Dumbledore to write her into their lives so completely that no one would ever question it. Sirius watched them leave with his daughter. He watched Helen Granger cradle the baby with the fierce protectiveness of a mother. Watched David Granger's hand rest on his wife's shoulder. Watched them disappear to the Muggle life that would be Hermione's world for the next 11 years. "It's done," Dumbledore said quietly. "She'll be safe." "Will she?" Sirius asked. His voice was empty. "Will she be safe when she learns magic exists and doesn't understand what she is? Will she be safe when she comes to Hogwarts and everyone tells her she's Muggle-born, that her magic is stolen, that she doesn't belong? She will be safer than she would be with a target painted on her back by the name Black," Dumbledore said. "That is what we can give her, Sirius. Safety. It may not feel like enough, but it will have to be." 1981, The Secret dies. Marlene McKinnon was murdered along with her entire family in mid-1981. The attack was brutal, methodical, and designed to send a message. Voldemort was winning. Order members were dying. No one was safe. Sirius, already consumed by the war and the increasing pressure as the Potters went into hiding, carried the grief alone. He couldn't mourn Marlene publicly. Their relationship had been secret, and revealing it now would only raise questions he couldn't answer. He couldn't tell James or Remus or anyone else that he had a daughter, because the only thing keeping her safe was the fact that no one knew she existed. 2 months later, on October 31st, 1981, James and Lily Potter were murdered by Lord Voldemort. Peter Pettigrew betrayed them. Sirius was blamed for everything: the betrayal, the Potters' deaths, the murder of 12 Muggles in a street explosion. Barty Crouch Sr., as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, sent Sirius to Azkaban without a trial. The secret died with him, or so it seemed. For 12 years, Sirius Black rotted in Azkaban, surrounded by dementors that fed on every happy memory he'd ever had. For 12 years, Hermione Granger grew up in a Muggle household, loved by parents who believed she was theirs, completely unaware that her real father was imprisoned for crimes he didn't commit, and that her real mother was dead. The only person who knew the truth was Albus Dumbledore, and he kept the secret perfectly. 1991. The Magic Manifests. Hermione's first act of accidental magic happened when she was 7 years old. A book she wanted on a high shelf floated down into her hands. Her second happened when a boy at school pushed her, and she made him fly backward without touching him. By the time she was 9, the incidents were frequent enough that David and Helen Granger were quietly, desperately worried. They were rational people, scientists in their own way. They researched obsessively, looking for medical explanations, psychological explanations, anything that made sense. They found nothing. When Hermione's Hogwarts letter arrived on her 11th birthday, delivered by a stern witch named Professor McGonagall, who explained that their daughter was a witch and would be attending a school for magic, the Grangers felt simultaneous relief and terror. Relief because their daughter wasn't broken or ill. Terror because she was about to enter a world they didn't understand and couldn't protect her in. Hermione felt only excitement. She read all her textbooks before term started. Twice. She practiced wand movements from diagrams. She memorized the list of every headmaster of Hogwarts and the founding of all 4 houses, and the properties of every ingredient in the standard potions textbook. She arrived at Hogwarts on September 1st, 1991, convinced that knowledge and effort would be enough, that if she just studied hard enough, practiced enough, proved herself enough, she would belong. She had no idea that her blood already made her belong in ways no one else at that school could claim. The Black blood manifests. The Black family's magical signature is distinctive. Centuries of concentrated magical heritage, despite the damage caused by extensive inbreeding that reduced the family's average lifespan to 59.5 years, produced witches and wizards of extraordinary power. Hermione Granger displayed that power from her first day at Hogwarts. She cast Wingardium Leviosa perfectly on her first attempt in Charms class, making Professor Flitwick actually applaud. She brewed a perfect cure for boils in her first potions lesson, while Neville Longbottom melted his cauldron 3 seats away. By the end of first year, she'd mastered spells that most third years struggled with. By second year, she was brewing Polyjuice Potion, a NEWT-level recipe that took a month to prepare and required precision most adult witches couldn't achieve. She did it at 12 years old in a bathroom, using stolen ingredients, with only a library book for reference. It was extraordinary. It should have been impossible. By 5th year, she'd mastered the Protean charm, magic explicitly described as beyond 7th year standard work, causing even Ravenclaw students to express disbelief when they saw the enchanted D.A. galleons. Secretary Boots' exact words were, "You know what these remind me of? That dark mark thing?" Hermione had responded, "Yes, that's right. The principle's the same." She had studied Voldemort's dark mark, the magical signature he burned into his followers' arms to summon them, and reverse-engineered it to create the DA's communication system. She examined dark magic, understood its mechanics, and repurposed it for her own use. This was not the behavior of a Muggle-born girl who'd learned magic from textbooks. This was instinct. This was blood. The sneak jinx she placed on the DA parchment was even more telling. When Marietta Edgecombe betrayed the group to Umbridge, the word sneak appeared across her face in purple pustules, a permanent, disfiguring curse, with no known counter-curse. It was cruel, effective magic that echoed the Black family's approach to loyalty and betrayal. Walburga Black had blasted her own son off the family tapestry for defying her. Hermione Granger had marked a traitor's face forever. The temperament was identical. And then there was her physical appearance. Lots of bushy brown hair and brown eyes, was how the books described her. The hair was wild, uncontrollable, growing worse as she aged rather than better. In fourth year, she needed Sleek Easy's hair potion just to manage it for the Yule Ball. What no one realized was that this wasn't natural Granger genetics. It was a glamour charm breaking down. When Dumbledore placed Hermione with the Grangers, he'd used a subtle appearance modification charm to ensure she resembled them enough that no one would question the connection. Brown hair instead of the pure black of the Black family. Brown eyes instead of the distinctive gray that marked Blacks for generations. Softer features instead of aristocratic sharpness. But glamour charms aren't permanent, especially ones placed on infants. As Hermione aged and her magic grew stronger, the charm destabilized. Her hair fought every attempt to control it because it was trying to remember its true form. Her eyes, in certain lights, looked almost gray. And to anyone who knew what to look for, the bone structure of her face, the high cheekbones, the determined jawline, was pure black. Dumbledore noticed in her second year. He saw Hermione across the Great Hall, and for just a moment saw Marlene McKinnon looking back at him. He said nothing. The time wasn't right. Severus Snape noticed in her third year. He'd hated Sirius Black with the fury of 15 years of accumulated resentment, and when he looked at the insufferable Gryffindor know-it-all in his potions class, he saw something that made him go very still. The way she held her wand, the precise, controlled fury when she was angry, the absolute conviction that she was right. He'd seen it before, in a boy who'd made his life hell for 7 years. He said nothing either, but he watched her more carefully after that. Summer 1993, the Gringotts revelation. The summer after second year, Harry Potter invited Hermione to stay at the Leaky Cauldron with him. He'd blown up his aunt, run away from the Dursleys, and was living in room 11 under the Ministry's protection, while Sirius Black, escaped mass murderer, was supposedly hunting him. Hermione arrived in Diagon Alley on August 15th, her parents having reluctantly agreed to let her spend 2 weeks in the wizarding world before term started. She met Harry for ice cream at Florian Fortescue's, helped him with his summer homework, and on August 18th, accompanied him to Gringotts to withdraw money for school supplies. The goblins at Gringotts had recently installed enhanced security measures in response to the break-in 2 years earlier, when Quirrell attempted to steal the Philosopher's Stone. One of these measures was an expansion of the thief's downfall, the waterfall in the deep vaults that washes away all enchantment, all magical concealment. And Ron passed through this waterfall during their desperate vault heist in 1998, and it stripped away their polyjuice potion disguises, revealing their true identities. The magic was absolute. It recognized no exceptions. The goblins had installed a smaller version of this enchantment at the main cart departure point. Every witch or wizard entering the deep vaults now passed through a detection field that verified their identity and stripped away any concealment magic. This was a problem for Hermione Granger, because she was standing under a 13-year-old glamour charm that she didn't know existed. The moment she and Harry stepped into the cart and passed through the detection field, Hermione felt something like cold water washing over her skin. It wasn't painful. It was just there, a sensation of something being pulled away, like removing a cloak she'd been wearing her entire life without realizing it. Harry noticed immediately. Hermione, your hair had changed. It was still curly, still bushy, but the color had darkened from brown to pure black. Not a gradient, not a mix. Absolute glossy black that caught the torchlight as the cart descended into the depths of Gringotts. "What?" Hermione started, then stopped. because she'd pulled out her wand to cast a diagnostic charm and caught sight of her reflection in the polished bronze of the cart's interior. Her eyes were gray, not brown, gray. The goblin driving the cart said nothing. Goblins did not involve themselves in wizarding identity crises unless it affected vault security. The trip to Harry's vault proceeded normally, her mind racing through every possibility. Polyjuice potion lasting 13 years. Impossible. A long-term glamour charm. Who would have cast it? Why? When they returned to the leaky cauldron, Hermione went straight to her room, locked the door, and looked in the mirror. Black hair, gray eyes, features that were sharper than she remembered, more defined. She looked like herself, but she also looked like someone else. Someone she'd never seen before, but who felt impossibly familiar. She spent 3 hours in the library section of Flourish and Blots, researching glamour charms, identity magic, and genealogical verification spells. By the time she returned to the leaky cauldron, she had a working theory and absolutely no idea what to do with it. The Black family tapestry. On August 25th, the Weasleys arrived at the leaky cauldron, and Hermione's appearance was the first thing Molly Weasley commented on. "Hermione, dear, did you dye your hair? It looks lovely, but you're so young for that sort of thing." "I didn't dye it," Hermione said. "It just changed." Arthur Weasley, who worked in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office and had a fascination with all things magical, looked at her with sharp interest. "Changed how?" "At Gringotts, when we went through the security check. It was brown, and then it wasn't." Arthur's expression shifted to something more serious. "The Thief's Downfall detection fields. They've expanded the enchantment to the main vault access points. It strips away all magical concealment." He paused. "Hermione, if your appearance changed when you passed through that field, it means you were under a glamour charm, a very powerful one, to have lasted this long." "I know," Hermione said quietly. "I've been researching. I think it was placed on me when I was a baby. I think someone wanted me to look like my parents." "But you do look like your parents," Ron said, confused. "I look like the Grangers," Hermione corrected. "But maybe I'm not supposed to." Molly Weasley's face had gone very pale. She was looking at Hermione with an expression that was part shock and part something else. Recognition. "Arthur," Molly said quietly. "Look at her face. Really look." Arthur did, and his eyes widened. "Merlin's beard," he breathed. "You look like—" "Like who?" Hermione demanded. "Like my cousin," Arthur said. Sirius Black. The silence in the leaky cauldron's private parlor was absolute. "That's impossible," Hermione said. "I'm Muggle-born. My parents are dentists. They're Muggles. I can't be related to Sirius Black. Even us. My grandmother was Cedrella Black before she married Septimus Weasley. The family disowned her for marrying a blood traitor, but the blood connection exists. Molly's family, the Pruetts, connect to the Blacks through Lucretia Black, who married Ignatius Pruitt. If you have black features, if a glamour charm was placed on you as a baby, then someone wanted to hide your connection to that family." "But why?" Hermione asked. "Why would anyone do that?" "To protect you," Molly said softly. "If you were a Black, and if you were born during the war, and if your parents wanted to keep you safe from Voldemort, they might have hidden you, placed you with Muggles, made you invisible." "But Sirius Black is in Azkaban," Hermione said. "He's a murderer. He betrayed Harry's parents. Even if I were somehow related to him, he's the last person who would have been trying to protect anyone." "Unless the story we've been told isn't true," Arthur said carefully. "Hermione, Sirius Black never received a trial. He was sent to Azkaban without one. That's not standard procedure, even during the war. It's always bothered me, but Barty Crouch was running the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the time, and he authorized dozens of imprisonments without trials. I assumed Sirius was just one of many. What if he wasn't guilty?" Hermione asked. The researcher in her was already connecting pieces, building hypotheses. What if he was innocent, and someone needed to hide his daughter before he was imprisoned? "Then you'd be the heir of the noble and most ancient House of Black," Arthur said. "And that, Hermione, would change absolutely everything." The tapestry's answer. The Black family tapestry hung in the drawing room of 12 Grimmauld Place, a house that had been empty and sealed since Walburga Black's death. The house itself was unplottable, magically concealed between numbers 11 and 13, in a row of Georgian townhouses in Islington, London. But Arthur Weasley knew where it was, because Arthur Weasley was, distantly, a Black. And the house magic recognized blood, On August 28th, 3 days before the start of term, Arthur brought Hermione to Grimmauld Place. Molly came too, and Harry, and Ron. They stood outside the row of houses while Arthur performed the complicated unlocking charm that blood relatives could use to bypass the Fidelius-adjacent wards. The door to number 12 materialized between 11 and 13. It was black paint and tarnished silver, with a serpent-shaped door knocker that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Arthur pushed the door open. Dust billowed out. The interior was dark, musty, and filled with the accumulated debris of a pure-blood family that had been dying for generations. "The tapestry is upstairs," Arthur said. In the drawing room, the Blacks kept meticulous records of their family tree for 7 centuries. "If you have black blood, Hermione, the tapestry will show it." They climbed the stairs past portraits of long-dead Blacks who shouted insults about blood traders and Muggles. They passed an umbrella stand that turned out to be made from a troll's leg. They passed a set of curtains that, when disturbed, released the shrieking portrait of Walburga Black, who screamed about filth and shame before Molly managed to close the curtains again. The drawing room was large, high-ceilinged, and dominated by a massive tapestry that covered the entire wall facing the door. It was old, genuinely ancient, with golden thread depicting the Black family tree stretching back 700 years. Hermione approached it slowly. Her eyes traced the connections, the marriages, the births. At the bottom of the tapestry, in the most recent generation, she found Sirius Black's name. There was a burn mark beside it, blasted off the tapestry by his mother when he ran away at 16, though the enchantment had preserved the name itself, because burning it completely would require Sirius's actual death. Below Sirius's name, where there should have been nothing, a golden thread was forming as she watched. It extended downward from Sirius's name, connecting to a new name that appeared in flowing script, Hermione Jean Black, not Granger, Black. And beside her name, in smaller script, a second line appeared, daughter of Marlene McKinnon. Hermione's knees buckled. Ron caught her before she fell. "It's true," she whispered. "It's actually true. I'm his daughter." "Then you're the heir," Arthur said quietly. "The noble and most ancient House of Black has an heir, and she's been hiding in plain sight for 13 years. Hermione looked up at the tapestry, at her name glowing in golden thread beside her father's burned name, and felt her entire understanding of herself fracture and reform. She wasn't Hermione Granger, Muggle-born girl who'd gotten lucky with magic. She was Hermione Black, daughter of Sirius Orion Black III and Marlene McKinnon, heir to one of the oldest and most powerful families in Britain. And her father was innocent and rotting in Azkaban for crimes he didn't commit. What the inheritance means. The Black family fortune was staggering. Vault 711 at Gringotts was a high-security vault in the deepest levels of the bank, protected by enchantments that had accumulated over 7 centuries. J.K. Rowling estimated Sirius's personal wealth at approximately 199,513 galleons, roughly $1.6 million in Muggle currency. But that was just what Sirius could access as a disowned son who'd inherited from his uncle Alfred. The full Black family fortune, which Sirius never accessed because he was imprisoned before Walburga died, was substantially larger. As the acknowledged heir, Hermione could claim all of it. More importantly, she could claim the political power that came with the Black name. The Blacks were connected by blood or marriage to at least 12 of the sacred 28 families, the pureblood families that dominated wizarding politics. Malfoy, Lestrange, Longbottom, Weasley, Pruitt, Crouch, Crabbe, Macmillan, Rosier, Flint, Burke, and Bulstrode. Every major political family in Britain had black blood somewhere in their lineage. The Wizengamot, the combined court and parliament of wizarding Britain, was dominated by these families. While hereditary seats weren't confirmed in canon, the Black family's Order of Merlin, first class, awarded to one of Sirius's grandfathers for services to the ministry and centuries of political involvement, meant deep institutional connections. Hermione could petition the Wizengamot directly. She could fund political campaigns. She could leverage the Black name's prestige among the pureblood families who controlled wizarding governance. And the first thing she intended to do with that power was get her father a trial. The heir takes action. Hermione spent the last 3 days before term started in the library at 12 Grimmauld Place. It was extensive, centuries of accumulated books on magic, law, politics, and dark arts that would have made Madame Pince faint. She read everything she could find about wizarding law, the Wizengamot's structure, trial procedures, and the specific provisions of the Wizengamot Charter of Rights. What she found made her furious. The charter explicitly guaranteed every accused witch or wizard the right to a trial, the right to present evidence, the right to call witnesses, and the right to be represented by a third party. Sirius Black had received none of these. He'd been taken from the scene of Peter Pettigrew's supposed death and sent directly to Azkaban on Barty Crouch Sr.'s authority. It wasn't just unjust, it was illegal. On September 1st, 1991, 2 years before this moment, Hermione Granger had boarded the Hogwarts Express as a Muggle-born girl, desperate to prove she belonged. On September 1st, 1993, Hermione Black boarded that same train as the heir of the noble and most ancient House of Black, carrying a leather portfolio containing a formal petition to the Wizengamot and a declaration of blood inheritance that would detonate like a bomb in Wizarding Society. Harry found her in a compartment, staring out the window at the Scottish countryside. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No," Hermione said honestly. "Everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. My parents aren't my parents. Well, they are, but not biologically. My father is in prison for something he didn't do. My mother is dead. And apparently I'm the heir to a family that spent centuries advocating for the exact blood purity ideology I've spent my entire Hogwarts career fighting against." "You're still you," Harry said. "Blood doesn't change that, doesn't it?" Hermione asked. "The entire wizarding world believes blood is everything. That's why Malfoy calls me mudblood. That's why purebloods think they're superior. And now I find out I have the purest blood of anyone at Hogwarts. And suddenly I have access to power and money and political influence I never could have dreamed of. How is that not proving them right?" "Because you're going to use that power to prove them wrong," Harry said. "You're going to get Sirius a trial. You're going to expose what the Ministry did. And you're going to do it as a Black, which means every pure blood in Britain will have to watch one of their own champion Muggle-born rights. That's not proving them right. That's destroying their entire ideology from the inside." Hermione looked at her best friend, her godbrother. She realized with a jolt and felt something settle in her chest. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been learning from the best," Harry said. "Now show me this petition you're filing. I want to help." The political explosion, the Daily Prophet's headline on September 15th, 1993. "Heir of House Black discovered alive, demands trial for imprisoned father." The article, written by an astonished reporter who'd received the official petition documents directly from Gringotts, detailed everything. Hermione's blood verification at Gringotts, the Tapestry confirmation at Grimmauld Place, her formal claim as heir of the House of Black, and the legal petition demanding Sirius Black receive the trial guaranteed by the Wizengamot Charter of Rights. The photograph showed Hermione standing in front of the Black family tapestry, her now black hair and gray eyes making the family resemblance unmistakable. The golden thread connecting her name to Sirius's was clearly visible. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Lucius Malfoy, who had married Narcissa Black and positioned himself as the heir apparent to Black family prestige, read the article over breakfast at Malfoy Manor and went utterly still. "That's impossible," he said. "The tapestry doesn't lie," Narcissa said quietly. She was staring at Hermione's photograph with an expression Lucius couldn't quite read. "If the tapestry acknowledges her, she is what she claims to be. Sirius's daughter. My cousin's child. A Muggle-raised girl who was sorted into Gryffindor and is best friends with Harry Potter cannot be the heir of the House of Black," Lucius said flatly. "I'll challenge the claim. Demand proof. Force a blood verification test." "The goblins already verified her blood," Narcissa pointed out. "And Lucius, she's not challenging us for money or property. She's demanding a trial for her father. If Sirius is exonerated, he becomes Lord Black. And if he dies in Azkaban or is executed, she inherits everything as his direct descendant. Either way, we lose." Lucius's hands clenched on the newspaper hard enough to crumple it. "Then we ensure the trial never happens." At the Ministry, Cornelius Fudge read the same article and felt his carefully maintained political equilibrium shatter. The noble and most ancient House of Black was one of the pillars of pure-blood society. The idea that its heir was a girl who'd been raised as a Muggle-born was embarrassing. The idea that she was demanding a trial that would expose the Ministry's wartime abuses was catastrophic. "What do we do?" his assistant asked. "We deny the petition," Fudge said. "On procedural grounds, Sirius Black is a convicted murderer. The case is closed." "There was no trial." "Exactly," Fudge said desperately. "Which means there's no conviction to overturn. The case was handled under wartime emergency provisions. We can argue that those provisions supersede the standard charter rights. That won't hold up to scrutiny. Then we stall, Fudge said. We bury the petition in bureaucratic procedure. We demand additional proof. We make it so complicated and expensive that even Black family gold can't push it through. But Fudge had miscalculated. Because Hermione Granger, Hermione Black, had spent 2 years learning from Minerva McGonagall how wizarding bureaucracy worked, and she'd spent the last 2 weeks reading every law book in the Black family library. She knew exactly how the ministry would respond, and she'd already filed secondary petitions with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Wizengamot Administration Services, and the Office of Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE, with a formal request to interview under veritaserum regarding the legal irregularities in her father's imprisonment. Amelia Bones and the law. Amelia Bones was 53 years old, a decorated aurora who had survived the First Wizarding War, despite losing most of her family and the most respected voice in magical law enforcement. She was also, crucially, fair. When Hermione's petition reached her desk, Bones read it 3 times. Then she pulled the file on Sirius Black's arrest and imprisonment. What she found made her deeply uncomfortable. There was no trial record, because there had been no trial. There was no interrogation record, no veritaserum testimony, no pensive memories entered into evidence, no witness statements beyond Peter Pettigrew's alleged final words to Sirius in the street. How could you, Sirius? The entire case rested on circumstantial evidence. Sirius had been the Potter's secret keeper. The Potters were dead. Pettigrew confronted Sirius and was killed along with 12 Muggles. Sirius was found at the scene laughing. Therefore, Sirius was guilty. But the Charter of Rights required actual evidence, required examination, required due process. Bones called Hermione to her office at the ministry on September 20th. Hermione arrived in formal robes, black with silver trim, the colors of House Black, carrying her leather portfolio, and accompanied by Arthur Weasley, who had agreed to serve as her legal advisor. At 13 years old, she couldn't legally represent herself in Wizengamot proceedings, but as heir of the House of Black, she could retain representation. Bones studied her across the desk. You look like him. I knew Sirius Black before the war. You have his eyes. I'm told I have my mother's temper, Hermione said. Marlene McKinnon, Bones said. I knew her too. She was a good witch, a good fighter. I'm sorry for your loss. I never knew her, Hermione said. She died when I was 2, but thank you. Bones opened the file on her desk. I've reviewed your petition and the evidence you've submitted. I've also reviewed the original arrest records. Miss Black, I'm going to be honest with you. The irregularities in this case are substantial. However, challenging a 12-year-old ministry decision involving a high-profile prisoner is politically complex. I'm not asking for politics, Hermione said. I'm asking for law. The Wizengamot Charter of Rights guarantees a trial. My father never received one. That's not a political question. That's a legal fact. The minister will argue that wartime emergency provisions superseded standard procedures. And 12 years is an unreasonable delay in providing basic due process, Hermione countered. And I'll note that Barty Crouch Sr., who authorized my father's imprisonment, was later discovered to have been keeping his own son under imperious curse in his house, a son who was a Death Eater, which raises questions about Crouch's judgment and whether his wartime decisions should be reviewed. Bones's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been approval. You've done your research. I've read every relevant law in the Black family library, Hermione said, which is extensive. I'm sure it is. Bones closed the file. Miss Black, I'm going to recommend to the Wizengamot that your petition be granted. Sirius Black should receive a trial. The evidence should be examined properly, under veritaserum if necessary. If he's guilty, the trial will confirm it. If he's innocent, then an innocent man has been imprisoned for 12 years, and the ministry owes him compensation and public exoneration, Hermione finished. Yes, Bones said, though I'll warn you, getting the Wizengamot to agree to this will require political capital. The minister will resist. Lucius Malfoy will resist. You'll be challenging powerful people who have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. I'm the heir of the noble and most ancient House of Black, Hermione said. I have political capital, and I'm going to use it. The Malfoy counterstrike, Lucius Malfoy's response, came through the Daily Prophet. On September 25th, the paper ran an editorial questioning Hermione's claim, demanding independent verification. and suggesting that the entire situation was a ploy by certain parties to destabilize pureblood families and undermine traditional wizarding values. The editorial stopped just short of calling Hermione a fraud, but the implication was clear. Draco Malfoy, who had spent 2 years calling Hermione mudblood and sneering at her blood status, found himself in an impossible position. His father had explicitly instructed him to avoid antagonizing Hermione, but he'd already established a pattern of hostility that couldn't be easily reversed. The result was painful awkwardness. In potions class on September 27th, Malfoy tried to insult Hermione out of habit, stopped himself mid-word, and ended up stammering incoherently while Pansy Parkinson stared at him in confusion. "What's wrong with you?" Pansy demanded. "Nothing," Draco snapped. But he shot Hermione a look that was equal parts resentment and fear. Hermione, for her part, ignored him completely. She had larger concerns than Draco Malfoy's identity crisis. The real confrontation came on October 3rd when Lucius Malfoy himself visited Hogwarts on school business and requested a meeting with Hermione in Dumbledore's office. Dumbledore permitted it, but insisted on being present. McGonagall attended as well, in her capacity as head of Gryffindor House and Hermione's head of house despite the Black revelation. Lucius arrived in expensive robes, platinum hair perfectly styled, carrying a walking stick that probably concealed his wand. He looked at Hermione with an expression of controlled disdain that didn't quite hide his calculations. "Miss Black," he said, the name clearly tasting bitter. "I've come to discuss your petition to the Wizengamot." "I wasn't aware it required discussion," Hermione said. "It's a legal petition. The Wizengamot will either grant it or deny it." "The Wizengamot responds to influence," Lucius said. "And I have considerable influence, as does my wife, who is a Black herself, and has a legitimate claim to family authority that supersedes the claim of a child who was raised by Muggles and knows nothing of our traditions." "Your wife was never disowned," Hermione said. "Neither was I, but my father was, and yet the Tapestry still acknowledges his line. The house magic at Grimmauld Place accepted me. The vaults at Gringotts recognized my blood. I'm not claiming authority based on tradition, Mr. Malfoy. I'm claiming it based on magic itself." Lucius's jaw tightened. "Your father is a murderer." "My father was never tried," Hermione corrected, "which is why I'm demanding a trial. If he's guilty as you claim, then the evidence will prove it. Unless you're afraid the evidence won't support the conviction you've all accepted for 12 years. "I'm afraid of nothing," Lucius said coldly. "But I am concerned about the damage this spectacle will do to the Black family's reputation. Narcissa has worked for years to maintain the family's standing in society. Your petition undermines everything she's built." "My petition demands justice," Hermione said. "If that undermines the standing you've built, perhaps that standing was never legitimate." Dumbledore, who had been watching with interest, spoke for the first time. "Lucius, I believe Miss Black has made her position clear. Unless you have official Wizengamot business to conduct, this meeting is concluded." "You're making a mistake, Miss Black. The political capital you're spending on this trial could have been used to secure your own position. Instead, you're alienating the very families whose support you'll need to maintain Black family authority." "I don't want their support if it comes at the cost of leaving an innocent man in Azkaban," Hermione said. "And Mr. Malfoy, every time you call me Miss Black instead of Mudblood, you prove that blood status only matters to people like you when it's convenient. I remember every insult your son has thrown at me. The Black name doesn't erase that. It just makes you a hypocrite." Lucius's face went white, then red. Then he turned and left without another word. McGonagall waited until the door closed. "That was extraordinarily bold, Miss Granger." "Miss Black," Hermione corrected quietly. "If I'm going to claim the power that comes with this name, I should claim the name itself. Though I hope you understand what you've just done. Lucius Malfoy is a dangerous enemy. He just doesn't know it yet." The trio transformed. The revelation of Hermione's heritage changed the trio's dynamics in ways both obvious and subtle. Harry's reaction was the simplest: joy. Sirius was his godfather. Hermione was Sirius's daughter. That made them family. Harry, who had spent his entire life desperate for family, suddenly had a godsister who'd been there all along. The idea that Hermione might actually free Sirius, that Harry might get to live with his godfather and his best friend under the same roof, was the best thing he'd ever imagined. Ron's reaction was more complicated. The Weasleys were the poorest pure-blood family in Britain. Ron wore hand-me-down robes, used Charlie's old wand, and brought sandwiches to the Yule Ball because he couldn't afford dress robes. His entire identity was wrapped up in being the loyal friend who had less than everyone else but gave what he could. Hermione, becoming a Black, didn't just mean she was wealthy. It meant she was wealthier than the Malfoys. It meant she had political power Ron's family would never have. It meant the careful equilibrium of the trio. Harry had fame, Hermione had intelligence, Ron had family. Was shattered. The tension emerged slowly over October and November. "You're different," Ron said one evening in the common room. "I'm the same person I've always been," Hermione said. "No, you're not. You walk differently. You talk differently. Yesterday you told Malfoy to mind his station when he insulted Harry. Mind his station. You sound like a pureblood," Hermione said. "That doesn't mean I've changed my values, doesn't it?" Ron asked. "You're spending all your time on this trial petition instead of helping with homework. You're meeting with ministry officials. You're wearing black family robes. You're acting like you're better than us." "I've never said that." "You don't have to say it," Ron said. "It's just, you're going to save Sirius, and he'll be Lord Black, and you'll be Lady Black or whatever the title is, and Harry will go live with you in some mansion somewhere. And I'll still be here with my second-hand everything, and nothing will have changed for me except that my best friends are now too important to care." Hermione stared at him. "Ron, that's not fair, isn't it?" Ron's ears were red. "You and Harry are family now. Actual family. Where does that leave me?" "It leaves you as our best friend," Harry said. He'd been listening from across the common room and had come over. "Ron, nothing about the way we feel about you has changed. Hermione being a Black doesn't make you less important. And for what it's worth, I'd rather live at the Burrow with you than in any mansion." "Easy to say when you've got the mansion as an option," Ron muttered. But the tension eased slightly, because Ron was fundamentally decent, and when he said things out of insecurity, he usually regretted them an hour later. This was no exception. "I'm sorry," Ron said eventually. "I'm being a git." "Yes, you are," Hermione said. "But you're our git, and Ron, the Weasleys are Blacks too," distantly. "Your grandmother was Cedrella Black, which means you and I are cousins. If anything, this makes us more family, not less." Ron brightened slightly. "Really? Really. Fourth or fifth cousins, probably. The Black family tree is complicated." "That's mental," Ron said. "But also kind of brilliant. The crisis passed, but Hermione knew it would return, probably at the Yule Ball when the wealth disparity became impossible to ignore. She filed it away as a problem for future Hermione and returned to the more immediate problem of forcing the ministry to grant her father a trial. The Wizengamot hearing. The hearing was scheduled for November 15, 1993. Amelia Bones had pushed it through over Fudge's objections, citing the clear violation of charter rights and the potential political damage if the noble and most ancient House of Black took their grievance public. Hermione was permitted to attend as the petitioner, despite being 13. Arthur Weasley accompanied her as her legal advisor. Dumbledore attended as chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and sitting in the petitioner's gallery, wearing borrowed formal robes and looking terrified, was Harry Potter. The Wizengamot chamber was circular, tiered, and intimidating. Approximately 50 witches and wizards in plum-colored robes sat in judgment. At the center of the floor sat a chair with chains, the accused chair, currently empty. Cornelius Fudge, as Minister for Magic, called the session to order. "We are here to consider the petition of Hermione Jean Black, heir of the noble and most ancient House of Black, regarding the case of Sirius Orion Black III. Miss Black, you may present your petition." Hermione stood. She'd rehearsed this speech for weeks. "Honored members of the Wizengamot, I petition for a trial for Sirius Black under the authority of the Wizengamot Charter of Rights, which guarantees every accused witch or wizard the right to trial, the right to present evidence, and the right to call witnesses. Sirius Black received none of these rights. He was imprisoned without trial on November 2, 1981, and has remained in Azkaban for 12 years without due process. The wartime emergency provisions superseded standard charter procedures," Fudge interjected. "The war ended when Voldemort fell on October 31, 1981, Hermione countered. "My father was arrested 2 days later. The emergency provisions cannot justify 12 years of imprisonment without trial. Sirius Black was caught at the scene of a mass murder," a wizard in the second tier said. "Peter Pettigrew and 12 Muggles dead." Black laughing. "The evidence was overwhelming. Was it examined under veritaserum?" Hermione asked. Were pensive memories taken? Were witnesses questioned under oath? No, because there was no trial. The Wizengamot convicted a man without hearing a single word of testimony. The circumstances spoke for themselves, Fudge said desperately. Circumstances can be misleading, Hermione said. Which is why we have trials. I'm not asking you to declare my father innocent. I'm asking you to examine the evidence that was never examined, hear the testimony that was never given, and provide the trial that was never held. If he's guilty, the trial will confirm it. But if you refuse to grant a trial, you're admitting that the ministry's conviction cannot withstand legal scrutiny. The chamber erupted in argument. Half the Wizengamot supported Hermione's position. The charter was clear, and denying a trial was indefensible. The other half, mostly Fudge's political allies and families with Death Eater connections, argued that reopening the case would undermine public confidence in the ministry. Dumbledore, as Chief Warlock, called for order. The question before us is simple. Does the Wizengamot Charter of Rights apply to Sirius Black? If yes, he is entitled to a trial. If no, then we must explain why a member of the noble and most ancient House of Black is exempt from the protections we guarantee to every other citizen. The vote was called. 31 in favor of granting the trial, 19 opposed. The trial was scheduled for December 10, 1993. Hermione sat down, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She'd done it. She'd forced the ministry to give her father his day in court. Now she just needed to prove he was innocent. Preparing the defense, the problem was evidence. Hermione had legal arguments, but she needed facts. She needed proof that Sirius hadn't been the Potter's secret keeper. She needed proof that Peter Pettigrew was alive, and she was rapidly running out of time. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Remus Lupin. Lupin had been teaching defense against the dark arts since September. He'd watched Hermione's transformation from Muggle-born student to Black heir with quiet interest, and when he heard about the trial, he requested a meeting. They met in his office on November 20th. "I knew your mother," Lupin said. "Marlene McKinnon. She was brilliant and brave and died far too young. I'm sorry you never knew her." "Thank you," Hermione said, "but I don't think you asked me here to talk about my mother." "No," Lupin agreed. "I asked you here because I know something about Sirius that might help his defense. Something I should have questioned 12 years ago but didn't, because I was grieving and broken and too ready to believe the worst." "What?" Hermione demanded. "Sirius wasn't the Potter's secret keeper," Lupin said. "James told me, the last time I saw him, that they'd switched. Made Peter the secret keeper instead, because no one would suspect him. Sirius was the decoy. If Voldemort came after the secret keeper, he'd go after Sirius, not Peter." Hermione's mind raced. "Can you testify to this?" "Under veritaserum, if necessary," Lupin said. "But Hermione, there's a problem. Even if I testify that Peter was the secret keeper, that doesn't prove Peter is alive. And if Peter is dead, as everyone believes, then Sirius could still have killed him after the betrayal." "Peter isn't dead," Hermione said. "He's been living as Ron Weasley's pet rat for the last 12 years. Lupin stared at her. "What?" "Scabbers. Ron's rat. He's 12 years old, which is impossible for a normal rat. He's missing a toe, which matches Peter Pettigrew. The only remains found were a finger. And he's an animagus. Peter Pettigrew was an unregistered animagus. We figured it out last June." "Where is he now?" Lupin asked urgently. "Ron still has him. We've been watching him carefully, making sure he doesn't escape. But Professor, if we bring Scabbers to the trial and force him to transform, we'll have proof. Proof that Peter is alive, proof that he faked his death, proof that Sirius couldn't have killed him. We'll need a reversal spell," Lupin said. "The Animagus reversal charm. I can cast it. Then we have our evidence," Hermione said. "Testimony from you about the secret keeper switch. Physical proof that Peter is alive. And if we use veritaserum on both Peter and Sirius, the truth will be undeniable." "This will work," Lupin said. There were tears in his eyes. "Hermione, if Sirius is innocent, if he's been in Azkaban for 12 years for something he didn't do, and everyone who put him there is going to answer for it." December 10th, 1993. The trial of Sirius Black. The Wizengamot chamber was packed. Every seat was filled, and the public gallery overflowed with spectators. The Daily Prophet had sent 3 reporters. The noble and most ancient House of Black's heir was about to defend her father in the trial of the decade. Sirius Black was brought from Azkaban under heavy guard. He looked terrible, gaunt, hollow-eyed. his aristocratic features stretched thin by 12 years of Dementor exposure. But when he was seated in the change chair at the center of the chamber and saw Hermione in the petitioner's box, his expression transformed. He saw Marlene's eyes looking back at him. He saw his daughter, grown from the infant he'd held for 10 minutes, into a young woman who looked exactly like both her parents. And he started crying. "State your name for the record," Dumbledore said gently. "Sirius Orion Black III," Sirius said. His voice was hoarse from disuse. "You stand accused of the betrayal of James and Lily Potter, leading to their murders, the murder of Peter Pettigrew, and the murder of 12 Muggles. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Sirius said. "To all charges. I never betrayed James and Lily. I never killed Peter. And I didn't kill those Muggles. Peter did." "The accused requests veritaserum testimony," Hermione said, standing. "Under the Charter of Rights, this request cannot be denied." Amelia Bones herself administered the veritaserum, 3 drops on Sirius's tongue. His eyes glazed slightly as the truth serum took effect. "Were you the Potter's secret keeper?" Bones asked. "No," Sirius said. "We switched. Peter was the secret keeper. I was the decoy." The chamber erupted. Fudge tried to call for order. "Did you betray James and Lily Potter to Voldemort?" Bones continued. "Never," Sirius said. "The word came out with such force that no one could doubt it. James was my brother. I would have died for him. For both of them." "Did you kill Peter Pettigrew?" "No. Peter killed those Muggles and faked his own death, cut off his own finger and transformed. He was the traitor. He's the one who told Voldemort where the Potters were hiding." "Where is Peter Pettigrew now?" Bones asked. "I don't know," Sirius said. "I've been in Azkaban for 12 years. But he's alive. I know he is." Hermione stood again. "I can answer that question. Peter Pettigrew has been living as my friend Ronald Weasley's pet rat for the last 12 years. I have him here, and I have a witness who can force his transformation." She gestured, and Ron came forward from the gallery, looking terrified, carrying Scabbers in a cage. Lupin stood. "I can perform the Animagus reversal charm, with the Wizengamot's permission." Permission granted. Lupin drew his wand. Ron opened the cage. Scabbers tried to run, but Lupin was faster. Libera corpus animagus. And where a rat had been, Peter Pettigrew stood blinking in the torchlight. A small, balding, rat-like man, missing a finger on his right hand. The chamber exploded in noise. "Peter Pettigrew," Bones said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You are under arrest for the betrayal of James and Lily Potter, the murder of 12 Muggles, and conspiracy to frame an innocent man. You will be questioned under veritaserum." Horrors stunned him before he took 3 steps. The veritaserum interrogation that followed was devastating. Peter confessed to everything. The secret keeper betrayal, the staged death, living as a rat for 12 years. He confessed that Sirius was innocent, that he'd framed him perfectly, that he'd hidden in plain sight while an innocent man rotted in prison. When it was over, Dumbledore stood. "The Wizengamot will vote. All in favor of a full exoneration of Sirius Orion Black III?" 50 hands rose. Unanimous. "Sirius Black, you are hereby exonerated of all charges. The Wizengamot apologizes for the miscarriage of justice you have suffered. You are free." The chains on the chair released. Sirius stood, swaying slightly. And Hermione ran to him. They collided in the center of the chamber, father and daughter, meeting for the first time in 13 years. Sirius held her like she might disappear, and Hermione cried into his shoulder while the entire Wizengamot watched. "I'm sorry," Sirius whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. I'm so sorry you had to do this alone." "I wasn't alone," Hermione said. "I had help, but I've got you now. We've got each other, and we're going to make up for every year we lost." The Lord and the Heir, Sirius Black, walked out of the Ministry of Magic on December 10th, 1993. A free man for the first time in 12 years. The press was waiting. Photographers from the Daily Prophet, reporters from Witch Weekly, even a correspondent from the International Confederation of Wizards newsletter. The flashbulbs were blinding. "Lord Black, how does it feel to be exonerated? Lord Black, what are your plans now that you're free?" Sirius, who had spent 12 years surrounded by Dementors and had forgotten how to navigate normal social interaction, froze on the ministry steps. The crowd pressed closer. The questions came faster. Hermione stepped forward. She was 13 years old, wearing formal black family robes, and she had just orchestrated the legal vindication of her father against the entire ministry establishment. She was not intimidated by reporters. "My father will be making a formal statement once he's had time to recover from 12 years of wrongful imprisonment," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "The noble and most ancient House of Black thanks the Wizengamot for upholding justice and looks forward to resuming its place in wizarding society. No further questions at this time." She took Sirius's arm and guided him through the crowd to the apparition point. Arthur, Weasley, and Remus Lupin flanked them protectively. They disapparated before anyone could ask another question. They arrived at 12 Grimmauld Place, which Hermione had spent the last month methodically cleaning with help from the Weasleys, Harry, and a deeply conflicted creature. The house was still grim, still dark, but it was habitable. More importantly, it was theirs. Sirius stood in the entrance hall and looked around at the house he'd hated as a child, the house he'd run away from at 16, the house that was now his responsibility as Lord Black. "I never wanted to come back here," he said quietly. "We don't have to stay here," Hermione said. "We can live anywhere. We have the resources. We could buy a house in the countryside or—" "No," Sirius interrupted. "This is the House of Black. For 7 centuries, the Blacks used this house as a monument to blood purity and everything wrong with wizarding society. If we're going to change what the House of Black means, we should do it here. We should make this place mean something better." Hermione looked at her father, gaunt, exhausted, traumatized, but still defiant after 12 years in hell, and felt something fierce settle in her chest. "Then that's what we'll do," she said. "We'll remake this house. We'll remake the family. We'll make toujours pour mean something worth being proud of." The political earthquake, the exoneration of Sirius Black, and the capture of Peter Pettigrew sent shockwaves through Wizarding Britain's political establishment that were still reverberating weeks later. The Daily Prophet ran a week-long series on ministry corruption during the war, detailing Barty Crouch Sr.'s authorization of imprisonment without trials, the use of dementors against suspects, and the culture of guilty until proven innocent that had dominated the Department of Magical Law Enforcement under his leadership. Crouch himself was disgraced. He resigned from his position as head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation on December 15th, citing health reasons. In reality, the pressure from reformist Wizengamot members and the threat of formal investigations into his wartime actions had made his position untenable. Cornelius Fudge survived, but barely. His initial resistance to Hermione's petition and his subsequent attempts to bury it had been documented by the press. He spent January 1994 desperately trying to repair his political capital by championing ministry transparency reforms that he'd opposed 3 months earlier. Amelia Bones, who had supported Hermione's petition from the beginning, saw her political star rise. The reformist faction in the Wizengamot coalesced around her, and by February, there was quiet talk of her potentially challenging Fudge for minister in the next election. But the most significant political shift was in the pureblood community itself. The noble and most ancient House of Black had been resurrected, led by a lord who was a convicted blood traitor, and an heir who'd been raised as a Muggle-born. This shouldn't have been politically viable. It should have resulted in social exile, the family being cut off from the sacred 28 networks that dominated wizarding politics. Instead, something stranger happened. The Blacks became a pole of attraction for families who were quietly uncomfortable with blood purity ideology but had never had permission to say so. The Greengrasses sent a formal letter of congratulations to Hermione on her father's exoneration. The Abbotts did the same. The Bones family publicly aligned themselves with the new House Black leadership. Even some traditionally conservative families, like the Longbottoms, made diplomatic overtures that suggested they were reevaluating their political positions. The calculus was simple. If the oldest, most pure family in Britain could be led by a girl raised by Muggles and a man who'd spent his entire adult life fighting blood supremacy, then blood purity as a political ideology was demonstrably hollow. The House of Black's very existence under Sirius and Hermione's leadership was a refutation of the principles the old house had stood for. Lucius Malfoy watched this unfold with barely contained rage. The Malfoy endgame, the confrontation between House Black and House Malfoy, came to a head on January 15, 1994. At a Wizengamot session called to vote on new transparency reforms in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Sirius attended in his capacity as Lord Black, taking the seat that had been empty for 12 years. He wore formal robes, his hair clean and trimmed for the first time since his imprisonment, looking every inch the aristocratic black heir despite the gauntness that Azkaban had carved into his features. Hermione sat in the family gallery, watching. Lucius Malfoy stood to speak against the reforms, arguing that they would hamper the ministry's ability to respond to magical threats and that excessive oversight would paralyze law enforcement. Sirius stood to respond. The last time the ministry was given unchecked authority to imprison citizens without trials, Sirius said, his voice carrying through the chamber, I spent 12 years in Azkaban for crimes I didn't commit. The efficiency Lucius Malfoy advocates for is the efficiency of injustice. These reforms don't hamper the ministry's ability to protect us. They prevent the ministry from destroying innocent lives in the name of security. Lord Black's personal grievance is understandable, Malfoy said smoothly. But it doesn't constitute sound policy. It's not a personal grievance when dozens of other witches and wizards were imprisoned under the same protocols, Sirius interrupted. It's a pattern of abuse. And the fact that some members of this chamber profited from that abuse, while their political rivals were conveniently imprisoned without trial, is worth examining. The chamber went very quiet. Are you accusing me of something, Lord Black? Malfoy asked, his voice dangerous. I'm noting that you were a known Voldemort supporter who claimed Imperius after the war, Sirius said. I'm noting that your gold bought you access to Fudge's office while I rotted in Azkaban. I'm noting that the system you're defending is the same system that protected Death Eaters while imprisoning their victims. Make of that what you will. Malfoy's face went white, then red. You dare? I dare quite a lot, actually, Sirius said. I spent 12 years with Dementors. I don't fear you, Lucius. And I don't fear exposing exactly what you are. Dumbledore called for order before the confrontation could escalate further. The vote proceeded. The transparency reforms passed 38-12. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Malfoy approached Hermione. Your father has made a powerful enemy, he said quietly. My father survived Azkaban, Hermione said. I don't think he's worried about you. Perhaps he should be. The Dark Lord is gone, but his ideology survives. There are still those of us who believe in the old ways, in blood purity, in proper wizarding society, and there are more of us who believe that ideology is poison, Hermione said. Mr. Malfoy, the world is changing. You can change with it, or you can be left behind. But either way, the House of Black will not be supporting your vision of proper wizarding society. Then the House of Black will find itself isolated, Malfoy said. We'll see, Hermione said. By the way, please tell Draco to stop trying to apologize to me in potions class. It's awkward for both of us. He spent 2 years calling me mudblood. Learning I'm a black doesn't erase that. The best thing he can do is leave me alone. She walked away before Malfoy could respond, leaving him standing in the corridor with the dawning realization that the political landscape had shifted under his feet and there was nothing he could do to shift it back. The Weasley resolution. The tension between Ron and Hermione that had been building since September finally erupted on February 14, 1994, Valentine's Day, when Lockhart-style singing dwarves delivered an embarrassing card to Hermione in the Great Hall. The card, which was from an anonymous admirer, praised her raven locks and aristocratic beauty in truly terrible poetry. It was clearly from someone trying to curry favor with the Black Heir, rather than someone who actually cared about Hermione as a person. Ron, who had been nursing his insecurities for months, made a comment about Hermione probably getting hundreds of those now that she was rich and titled. Hermione, who had spent the entire morning dealing with similar correspondence and was exhausted by the social politics of being a Black Heir, snapped. You know what, Ron? Yes, I do get letters from people who want to use me for my family name and my money, and it's exhausting and shallow, and I hate it. But at least they're not pretending I'm less valuable because of where I came from. You've spent months making me feel guilty for being a black, like it's something I chose, like it's something I should apologize for. I never asked for this. I never wanted to find out my entire identity was a lie. But it happened, and I'm dealing with it, and the last thing I need is my best friend acting like I've betrayed him by having wealthy relatives. I never said you betrayed me. You didn't have to say it. You've been acting like it since September. Every time I meet with ministry officials, every time I wear black robes, every time I use my family resources to help my father, you look at me like I'm turning into someone you don't recognize. Well, guess what? I'm not turning into anyone. I'm still the same person who brewed polyjuice potion in a bathroom to help you and Harry investigate the Chamber of Secrets. I'm still the same person who used a time turner to save Buckbeak and Sirius last year. The only thing that's changed is you know my bloodline, and apparently that matters more to you than who I actually am." The Great Hall had gone very quiet. Everyone was watching. Ron's ears were crimson. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Hermione demanded. "You're doing exactly what the purebloods do, judging me based on my blood instead of my character. The only difference is they're judging me positively and you're judging me negatively. But it's the same fundamental problem. You think blood matters, and I spent 2 years fighting against that ideology, only to find out the people I care about most believe it just as much as the Death Eaters do." "I don't believe in blood purity," Ron said desperately. "Then stop acting like my being a black changes anything about who I am." Hermione's voice cracked. "I'm still your friend, Ron. I'm still the same person. And if you can't see that, then maybe you were never really my friend to begin with. Maybe you were just friends with the safe, non-threatening Muggle-born girl who made you feel better about your own family's struggles. But the moment I became someone with actual power, I stopped being safe, and you stopped being comfortable." Ron looked like he'd been slapped. "Hermione, I need some air," Hermione said, and walked out of the Great Hall. Harry found her 20 minutes later in the library, which was where Hermione always went when she needed to think. "Ron's an idiot," Harry said. "Ron's insecure," Hermione corrected. "There's a difference." "Okay, Ron's an insecure idiot. But Hermione, he's also not entirely wrong that you've changed." Hermione looked up sharply. "You too?" "Let me finish," Harry said. "You have changed. You're more confident, more willing to challenge authority, more comfortable using power to get what you want. But those aren't bad changes. They're you growing into yourself. The old Hermione would never have stood up to Lucius Malfoy the way you did. She would never have forced the Ministry to give Sirius a trial. You've become more of who you were always meant to be, and Ron's uncomfortable with that because it makes him feel left behind." "So what do I do?" Hermione asked. "You keep being yourself," Harry said, "and you give Ron time to adjust. He'll come around. He always does. Remember how long it took him to apologize after the firebolt incident?" "Months," Hermione said. "Exactly. Ron processes things slowly. But he loves you. We both do. And he'll figure out eventually that you being a black doesn't change that." The reconciliation happened 3 days later, initiated by Molly Weasley. Molly invited Hermione to the Burrow for Sunday dinner and sat her down in the kitchen while the boys were outside denoming the garden. "Ron told me what happened," Molly said. "He's ashamed of himself, as he should be. That boy has a good heart, but sometimes his insecurities get the better of him. But I also think you need to understand something about the Weasleys," Molly continued. "We're blood traders. We've been disowned by half the pureblood families in Britain for generations. We're poor. We're looked down on. And our children grow up knowing that the wizarding world judges them for things they can't control. Their family name, their lack of money, their hand-me-down robes. Ron's spent his entire life feeling like he's not good enough. And then his best friend turns out to be the heir to the most powerful family in Britain. And suddenly all the things he's been judged for, his blood status, his family connections, are things you have in abundance. It's not about you, Hermione. It's about him feeling like he'll never measure up. But I don't care about that, Hermione said. I never have. I know you don't. But Ron needs to hear it from you. Not in anger. In honesty. Tell him what he means to you. Tell him that being a black doesn't change how you feel about the Weasleys. Because Hermione, you're family to us. You have been since you saved Ginny in the Chamber of Secrets. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. The conversation with Ron happened that evening, in the garden after dinner. I'm sorry, Ron said. I've been a complete prat. Yes, you have, Hermione agreed. I felt like I was losing you. Like you were becoming this important person. And I was still just me. You're the person who made me laugh when I was petrified. You're the person who stood by Harry even when it was dangerous. You're the person who plays chess better than anyone I've ever met and who notices things about people that I miss because I'm too focused on books. You're brilliant and loyal and funny, and none of that has anything to do with how much money you have or what your last name is. I don't need you to be a black. I need you to be Ron. Ron's ears went red, but this time from emotion rather than embarrassment. You really mean that? Of course I mean it. And Ron, the Weasleys are blacks. Distantly. Your grandmother was Cedrella Black. Which means you and I are family. So if you're worried about me leaving you behind when I go live in the Black Ancestral Home or whatever, Remember that the Blacks and the Weasleys have been connected for generations. You're part of this too. That's still mental, Ron said, but also kind of brilliant. It is, rather, Hermione agreed, and they both laughed. The crisis passed. The trio's equilibrium restored itself, this time on a foundation that was more honest about the power dynamics at play and more deliberate about maintaining the relationships that mattered. Year 4. The Triwizard Tournament and Voldemort's return. The Triwizard Tournament proceeded largely as it had in the original timeline, with one critical difference. Harry had Sirius. When Harry's name emerged from the Goblet of Fire, Sirius didn't send letters from a cave where he was hiding. He marched into Hogwarts as Lord Black demanded to speak to Dumbledore and the tournament officials, and made it abundantly clear that if any harm came to his godson during this magically binding competition that Harry hadn't entered voluntarily, there would be political and legal consequences. Barty Crouch Jr.'s imposture as Mad-Eye Moody proceeded as planned. He was skilled enough with Polyjuice and paranoid enough in his behavior that Sirius, who'd been out of the field for 12 years, didn't recognize the deception immediately. But he was watching. The first task went as planned. Dragons. Harry survived using his firebolt, which Sirius had given him the previous year, and which Harry had actually been allowed to keep this time, because there was no question of it being cursed. The second task, the Lake Challenge, was where Sirius's presence changed things. Because Sirius was at Hogwarts, staying in Hogsmeade and visiting the castle regularly, he was present when the champions were given the clue about the something precious being taken from them. When Hermione, Ron, Cho Chang, and Fleur's sister Gabrielle disappeared the night before the task, Sirius was the first person to recognize what had happened, and to be absolutely furious about it. They took my daughter to the bottom of the lake without her consent as part of a school competition? Sirius's voice was dangerous. And they didn't think to inform the heads of family first? Dumbledore, for the first time in decades, looked genuinely uncomfortable. The champions were told their treasures would be perfectly safe. That's not the point. The point is you used students as bait without informing their guardians. If anything had gone wrong, if one of the champions had failed to retrieve them in time, you'd have had dead students on the lake bottom. The enchantment would have released them after an hour, Dumbledore said. And you didn't think Lord Black might want to know that his heir was being held underwater for an hour for a tournament she's not even competing in? The confrontation resulted in new protocols for the third task that required parental notification and consent for any magic used on non-competitors. Sirius was becoming a thorn in Dumbledore's side in ways he'd never been before, because this Sirius had something to protect beyond himself. The third task, the maze, was where Barty Crouch Jr.'s plan unraveled. When Harry and Cedric grabbed the portkey cup and disappeared, Sirius immediately knew something was wrong. The cup was supposed to take them to the entrance, he said to Dumbledore. It's been too long. Where are they? Dumbledore's face went pale. The portkey was tampered with. By who? I suspect, Dumbledore said quietly. By whoever has been engineering Harry's path through this tournament from the beginning. They found Moody, the real Moody, trapped in a trunk in the imposter's office. 30 minutes later. By the time they'd administered Veritaserum to Barty Crouch Jr. and learned what had happened, Harry and Cedric were already in the graveyard. Voldemort's resurrection proceeded as planned. Wormtail cut off his hand. The ritual succeeded. Voldemort rose from the cauldron, more powerful than he'd been as a shade, with a body rebuilt from bone, flesh, and blood. But the duel between Harry and Voldemort was interrupted by something neither of them expected. A phoenix. Fawkes appeared above Harry in a burst of flame, summoned by the loyalty and desperation of a boy who was about to die. The phoenix's presence disrupted Voldemort's control over the wand connection, giving Harry the seconds he needed to grab Cedric's body and trigger the portkey back to Hogwarts. Harry arrived in the maze entrance carrying Cedric Diggory's corpse and screaming, "He's back! Voldemort's back!" He pulled Harry away from the crowd, checked him for injuries, and held him while Harry sobbed. And when the Ministry tried to deny what had happened, when Fudge insisted it was impossible, when the Daily Prophet prepared to run stories calling Harry a liar, Sirius Black stood before the Wizengamot as Lord of the noble and most ancient House of Black and said, "My godson does not lie. Lord Voldemort has returned." The dark mark was cast over the Quidditch World Cup last summer. Death Eaters are active. And if this Ministry chooses denial over preparation, history will judge you as harshly as it judged Barty Crouch's wartime abuses. If Lord Black, a man who'd spent 12 years in Azkaban because of Voldemort's war, was saying the Dark Lord had returned. It couldn't be dismissed as easily as the word of a 14-year-old boy. The denialism that paralyzed the ministry and canon still happened, but it was weaker, more contested. And critically, it didn't prevent the Order of the Phoenix from reforming immediately with resources and political backing it had never had before. The War Machine, House Black against Voldemort. The second rise of Voldemort proceeded very differently when the noble and most ancient House of Black was actively opposing him. Sirius converted Grimmauld Place into Order of the Phoenix headquarters immediately, but this time he did it as a free man with full access to his vaults rather than as a fugitive confined to his house. The difference was staggering. Order operations were funded by black gold. The best defensive wards money could buy protected the headquarters. Aurors who'd been hesitant to join an underground resistance were more willing to ally with a recognized lord of an ancient house who was operating legally. Hermione, now 15, took on an increasingly active role. Her intelligence network leveraged the Black family connections she'd spent 2 years building. The Blacks were related to the Lestranges, the Malfoys, the Crabs. Every major Death Eater family had black blood somewhere in their lineage. This created opportunities for intelligence gathering that the Order had never had. House elves gossiped. Family portraits talked, and a surprising number of pure-blood families who were officially neutral were willing to pass information to the Black heir when she asked politely. The key strategic shift was Kreacher. In canon, Kreacher betrayed Sirius because Narcissa and Bellatrix treated him kindly, while Sirius treated him with contempt. In this timeline, Hermione had been treating Kreacher with the same respect she'd given to all house elves since founding SPEW. She paid him. She thanked him. She asked his opinion on household matters. Kreacher, who had spent decades serving the Black family and had deeply complicated feelings about blood purity and tradition, found himself serving a heir who was everything his old mistress Walburga had despised, Muggle-raised, progressive, friends with blood traitors, and yet who treated him better than any Black had in 50 years. The result was fierce loyalty. When Narcissa tried to use Kreacher to gather intelligence on the Order, Kreacher reported the attempt to Hermione immediately. When Hermione asked Kreacher about the Horcrux locket that Regulus had died trying to destroy, Kreacher told her everything. The locket was in the house, hidden in a cabinet. Kreacher had been trying to destroy it for years and couldn't. Hermione brought the locket to Dumbledore in October 1995. "Professor, I think this is a Horcrux. I think Voldemort made multiple soul anchors to prevent his death. And I think my uncle Regulus died trying to destroy one of them." The Horcrux hunt that consumed the original timeline's Year 7 began in Year 5 with institutional support, adult expertise, and years of preparation time. By the end of 1995, Dumbledore had confirmed the existence of Horcruxes and identified several likely candidates. The diary, already destroyed by Harry in Year 2. The locket, recovered. The ring, which Dumbledore retrieved from the Gaunt Shack with proper precautions after Hermione warned him about the curse. And Hufflepuff's cup, location unknown but suspected to be in the Lestrange vault. The war that in canon lasted years and cost 50 lives at the Battle of Hogwarts became a more strategic operation. Voldemort was still dangerous. Death Eaters still killed. But the Order was better funded, better connected, and operating with intelligence advantages that Voldemort couldn't counter. The turning point came in 1997, when Bill Weasley, the Gringotts cursebreaker, who was now also Hermione's distant cousin through the Black Weasley connection, helped the Order negotiate with the Goblins for access to the Lestrange vault. The Goblins, who had no love for Voldemort and who were offended by the idea of dark artifacts endangering their bank, agreed to a controlled retrieval. The cup was recovered, destroyed. By early 1998, all Horcruxes except Nagini were destroyed. Voldemort's immortality was hanging by a thread, and the final confrontation was approaching. The Battle of Hogwarts, that wasn't. In the original timeline, the Battle of Hogwarts was a desperate last stand. The castle was invaded, students fought Death Eaters in the corridors, and 50 people died in a single night. In this timeline, the battle never happened, because when Voldemort marched on Hogwarts in May 1998, he found the castle evacuated. The students had been sent home. The teachers had withdrawn to defensible positions. And waiting for him in the grounds was not a ragtag collection of students and professors, but a coordinated force. The Order of the Phoenix, fully funded and prepared. The Aurora Corps, no longer paralyzed by ministry denialism, and standing at the front in formal black robes with the Black family crest was Lord Sirius Black and his daughter, the heir. "You shouldn't have come back, Tom," Sirius called across the grounds. "You're outnumbered. You're outmaneuvered. And you're already dead. You just haven't realized it yet." How poetic. The daughter of my enemy, carrying the blood of my supporters, fighting for the mudbloods and blood traders. "I'm carrying the blood of a family that survived for 7 centuries, Hermione said. "You're carrying soul fragments that we've been destroying one by one for the last 3 years. You made 7 Horcruxes. We've destroyed 6. You have 1 left, Nagini, and she's not going to save you." Neville Longbottom, standing in the second rank with the sword of Gryffindor, stepped forward. "For my parents," he said, and drove the sword through the snake with the strength of someone who'd spent 7 years waiting for this moment. Nagini died, and Voldemort, who had felt each Horcrux destruction like a distant wound, felt the last anchor sever and knew he was mortal. The duel that followed was not between Voldemort and Harry. It was between Voldemort and Dumbledore, with Sirius and Kingsley Shacklebolt providing support. It was brutal, desperate, and short. Voldemort died to a killing curse from his own wand, rebounded by the Elder Wand's refusal to kill its true master. He died on the Hogwarts grounds, but not in a castle filled with bodies. He died in a prepared battlefield, facing the combined strength of a wizarding world that had learned from its mistakes. The war ended, not with a broken Harry Potter walking to his death in the Forbidden Forest, but with a coordinated effort that proved what the wizarding world could accomplish when it worked together. And at the center of that effort, the House of Black had proven that blood purity was a lie, that tradition could be transformed, that the oldest family in Britain could stand for justice instead of supremacy. 19 years later, Platform 9 3/4, September 1st, 2017. Hermione stood beside the barrier between the Muggle and magical worlds, watching her daughter Rose prepare to board the Hogwarts Express. Rose had bushy brown hair, not quite black yet, the glamour hadn't fully destabilized, and her mother's fierce intelligence. Ron stood on Hermione's other side, holding Hugo's hand. They'd married in 2005, after Ron had finally worked through his insecurities enough to believe that Hermione actually wanted to be with him, rather than someone wealthier or more accomplished. "Do you think she'll be in Gryffindor?" Ron asked. "Does it matter?" Hermione asked. "She'll be brilliant wherever she goes." Spoken like a true Ravenclaw, came a voice from behind them. Sirius, now 60 years old with gray in his black hair, grinned at his daughter. "Though we both know the hat will probably put her in Slytherin just to give the purebloods a heart attack. The purebloods have had 20 years to get used to the idea that the Blacks don't care about their ideology anymore," Hermione said. "If they're still having heart attacks, that's their problem." Harry approached with Ginny and their 3 children. Albus looked nervous about his first year. James was already causing trouble. Lily was demanding to know why she couldn't go to Hogwarts yet. "Ready?" Harry asked Hermione. "I've been ready for years," Hermione said. "She's been practicing spells since she was 8. I've had to confiscate her wand twice." "She's a Black," Sirius said proudly. "Rules are suggestions. Rules are structures that prevent chaos," Hermione corrected. "But yes, she's learned which ones are worth breaking. I taught her that myself." Rose boarded the train with Albus Potter and Hugo Weasley and several other children of the war generation. The whistle blew. The train began to move. Hermione watched it disappear around the bend and felt something settle that had been unsettled since she was 13 years old and learned her entire identity was a lie. "You did it," Sirius said quietly. "You took the House of Black, the family that spent centuries standing for everything wrong with our world, and you turned it into something that stands for justice. Your mother would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. We did it," Hermione corrected. "You and me. Together," Sirius agreed. They turned away from the platform and walked back into the Muggle world, leaving behind the magical one they'd spent 20 years transforming. The House of Black endured, but it endured as something new, something better. The tapestry at Grimmauld Place had been modified. The burn marks were repaired, Sirius's name restored, Andromeda's name restored. New names had been added: Hermione, Ron, Rose, Hugo. The Weasleys were on the tapestry now, officially recognized as family. And beneath the traditional motto, Toujours pur, a new line had been added in golden thread: Toujours juste. Always just. The noble and most ancient House of Black had never needed pure blood. It had needed Hermione Granger, and she had proven that the brightest witch of her age could be both a Black and a revolutionary, both an heir to tradition and a force for change. both proud of her heritage and committed to dismantling every harmful thing that heritage had stood for. The war was over. The family was remade. And toujours pour meant something worth being proud of at last. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.